All right. Welcome to the third installment of the International Leadership Series for 2020 and 2021 school year. We are absolutely pleased to have with us today Hugh Burton, and we'll see him here in a second as we move through. Our conversation for today is When Policing Goes Wrong, our conversation with Hugh Burton. But as we have all of the time with our International Leadership Series, we actually have some purpose behind what we are actually doing. So as we move forward today, this year, the International Leadership Series is focusing on social justice and equity as one of the 7 elements of global citizenship. And so we want to make sure that everyone knows what social justice is. Social justice is the inclusion of everyone in the full benefits of society and the empowerment of people to participate fully in the cultural, economic, political, and social life of a country. As we're hearing Hugh Burton's story throughout the course of the day today, we would like for you to really think about the interplay of the next concepts we'll be discussing: power, privilege, and oppression, as we're moving through here. Power is the ability or official authority to decide what is best for others, right? It's the ability to decide who will have access to resources, who has and it's really about who has the capacity to exercise all control really over others. And so we hope that at the course of this, that you will be able to understand how power has really played a role in Hugh Burton's story. So what is privilege, right? Privilege is the unearned access to resources only readily available to some people as a result of their advantaged social group membership. And remember, sometimes we have privilege in one group and may not have it in another group based off of our social group identities. Oppression is a system that maintains advantage and disadvantage based on social group membership and operates intentionally and unintentionally on individual, institutional, and cultural levels. And I think when we hear Hugh's story today, we're absolutely going to understand this level of oppression that exists and that he has encountered throughout his story. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing as we've covered the major points of our presentation here at the beginning, and we're going to turn it over to Hugh. But before we do, I could go on and on about just the such an interesting story that Hugh brings with him, but we are super pleased to bring Hugh Burton from one of the beneficiaries of the Innocence Project, along with his team of other professionals throughout his legal team, and really understanding his story that really began in 1991 and really lasted all the way up until 2019. And even in 2020, I know that there's some new developments on the front here, but through the Innocence Project and through his team, he's been able to receive the vacation of his murder conviction based off of flawed interrogation techniques that proved unreliable by career detectives. And so we have quite a bit of things. I don't want to really take up too much of his time. So I'm just going to basically turn it over to Hugh here and let you go ahead and share your story, things of that nature. So we're very excited to have you here. Welcome to Texas A&M International University. Hugh, I believe you're still muted. I did mute you there for a little bit, so you're going to have to unmute yourself.
Okay, got it. Good. Thank you guys so much. Thank you for the introduction. I'm so thankful and I'm so grateful to be here. because this journey, it was a 30-year journey, something that didn't have to happen, something that they knew a couple of days after this crime took place. They more or less knew the details and decided that they were going to hide them. So to be able to be here to speak to you after all of this time, I'm humbled and I'm thankful. Um, as you heard, my story starts when I was a 16-year-old sophomore living in the Bronx with my parents. My parents were Jamaican immigrants. My mom was a registered nurse. My dad was an independent contractor who was also a saxophone player. We lived together in a three-family private home in the Bronx that my parents owned. We lived in the middle, and they rented out the other two floors. Um, on the day that this happened, it was January 3rd, 1989. It was my mom's first day back to work. I mean, well, it was her first day for off of a holiday, and it was my first day back to school after the holiday break. My dad at the time was out of the country visiting his mom. The day started as normal as any other. I got up, got ready for school. I got dressed. My mom was sitting on the couch, and we joked about me doing better in school this semester. Um, I left. I went to school. I got back about 2:30 or somewhere there about in the afternoon. When I got back, I noticed that my mom's car wasn't in the driveway. So thinking that she was just out running errands, I said, well, she should be back any minute. I went in, and as I was going into the house, I could hear the telephone ring. I answered the phone, and it was a friend of mine who asked me to come by. Not even going fully into the house, I turned around and closed the door and went right back out. I went to her house. I got back about 5:30 or so. I noticed that the car was still not in the driveway. She still wasn't home. Um, After that, I got in the house. I began to take off my things, and I walked towards the back of the house. When I got to the back, I noticed that my parents' bedroom, the door was open, which was a bit strange. We usually close doors when we were leaving the house if no one was there. When I went in the room out of curiosity, I found my mom. She had been stabbed to death. I, I'm screaming, I'm crying. I go to grab the phone to call the police, but the cord from the base to the receiver was not in the phone. They had taken that out and bound her wrist with the cord. So I ran out. I used another phone in the hallway. I called the police, told them what I had just come home to find, and waited for them outside. I couldn't stay in the house. They arrived shortly because the precinct wasn't too far from where we lived. Once they got there, they asked me if I had noticed if anything was strange or out of the ordinary. I told them that when I left this morning, her car was here, and I got back, the car is not here. Where is that? I want to know, where is the car? So I gave them my whereabouts, where I was at for the day, that I was in school, that I had a friend that called, and I went over there after. They asked me if I had any place to go. I had a godmother that lived not far from there. They brought me there maybe 1, 2 in the morning. I got there, and where I stayed, I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep. The only image in my head is what I saw the afternoon of the 3rd. Finally, on the 5th, they called my godmother and said that they wanted to bring me in for a polygraph test. I didn't even want to get out of the bed, but I wanted to know what happened to my mom. So reluctantly, I went. I got down to the precinct. The interview started out the same way it did on the 3rd. But at some point, maybe about an hour and a half or 2 hours into this questioning, it turned very accusatory. And they were telling me that they had evidence that they felt that I was the one who committed this crime, and that they knew that I wasn't in school. I began crying. I'm asking for my dad, and I'm saying, I was in school. Um, I don't know what you're talking about. I didn't do anything. And this goes on. This goes on for a while. The more I'm telling them, no, I didn't commit the crime, the more they're telling me, you committed this crime and you're going to tell us that you committed this crime. After this goes on for a while, I'm still asking for my father, and they're telling me, you'll see your father when you tell us what we need to hear. Um, they then began to tell me that we know that you were with your girlfriend, that checked out. But what you didn't know is that she was underage. You're 16, she's 13. What that constitutes is statutory rape. I'd never heard the term before, and it wasn't true. I was 16, she was 13. That's not by law, that's not statutory rape. Them knowing that I never had any involvement with law enforcement, them knowing that I was ignorant of all of this and traumatized, they knew what they could say to me to get me to do whatever it is they wanted me to. Finally, they told me that if I didn't say that I committed this crime, not only will I go to prison for killing my mom, but I will also go to prison for statutory rape. And I know what's going to happen to me if I go to Rikers Island for statutory rape. Um, this further terrified me, and this I'm still telling them I didn't commit this crime. But after many hours, they finally broke me down because they said, well, what we'll do is if you do say you committed this crime, because we know that this was an accident, we'll make sure that you just go to family court and your dad can come and pick you up. Them knowing that I had no knowledge of law or anything like that, they knew that all of this sounded like it was true or that it was doable. Um, they had no intention of ever doing that. Finally, we sat down and together they had me write this detailed confession about me owing a local drug dealer for drugs that he gave me and I didn't sell. And as a result of that, I confronted my mother about the money and she wouldn't give it to me and I took her life. That was the statement that they had me write. There was a problem with that. It stood and I was arrested and charged. But about a week later, on the day of my mom's funeral, they did find that car. And they found that car in the possession of our neighbor, someone whom they had questioned a week before and deemed to be someone that was irrelevant and had no relevance to this case. At this point, they had a problem because they had a 16-year-old who they say admittedly said he committed this crime, but you have other evidence that proves that someone else with a violent criminal past that you know about is in possession of his mother's car. So they doubled down on everything that they did to me inside that precinct and made him also make a statement that I committed the crime. So what they in essence did is conspired with the actual murderer to cover up a murder. As I said, I was arrested and charged with second-degree murder. My dad, my biggest supporter, gave his life savings and ultimately his health and his life, trying to defend me. Um, and to no avail. After fighting hard for 3 years, finally in 1991, I was convicted and sentenced to 15 years to life. Still committed to fighting. My dad and I, we appealed. And we appealed every chance we got. Every time they denied us, we appealed again. Finally, there was no more appeals. I had exhausted everything, and I was subjected to just having to do the time. But never giving up and always writing to people and trying to get people interested in the case and show them that there is something to take a look at here. Um, Through that, my father's health would begin to fail. And finally, in 2005, he passed. Still committed to writing and trying to get out and get people to get interested in the case. I finally got people to reach back, and that was through Northwestern and Rutgers Law Clinic in Newark. They reached out and decided, felt that there was some merit here. There was some things that were worth fighting. And they told me, if I make the next parole board and I got out, and if I was still committed to wanting to fight, they were there. I was paroled in September of 2009, and that was the first phone call that I made to get in contact with them to say, listen, we still have a fight. that set off the next 10 years, fighting, unearthing all of the things that they decided that they wanted to keep hidden. And finally, in 2019, January 24th, after 30 years, I was exonerated, and it felt good, but it was bittersweet. It was a great day, but my parents still hadn't received their justice. I had received mine. I was vindicated. I no longer had this cross to bear. Um, but my parents didn't get theirs. My mom was afforded a 48-hour investigation, and my dad, the last 13 years of his life, was just suffering. So they never got theirs. So I still continue to fight, talk, educate people, um, until my parents are able to get there. So pretty much that's been the last 30 years of my life in a nutshell. I try not to do too much talking. I try to engage everybody. So I'm sure that there are a lot of questions, and I love questions because I learn things from a lot of your questions. So please, by all means, I don't want to take up too much of the floor. Ask me anything you want to know. Please ask me.
Great. And so it's greatly appreciated, that story. And I don't think I could have done any justice as it related to your own story. So what we're going to do here is we are going to ask folks to go ahead and type questions in the chat box, and then I'll go ahead and read them. I think that would just make it easier for us as we move through here. As this is beginning, though, can you walk us through what is currently happening in relation to your case, right? So I know that there's been some recent developments on your behalf. What's really happened in the last 2 years since January 24th, 2019?
Pretty much we enter into a civil phase. So, the civil phase, at this point, it's now we want to hold people accountable for what they knew and what they did or what they didn't do. So, this affords me an opportunity, again, to move towards that space of holding people accountable. The country has laws that are in place that really protect prosecutors, law enforcement from any type of wrongdoing, things that, they did in their investigations. I'm committed to saying, okay, well, let's see what we can do to change that. So pretty much that's what's been going on with me for the last 2 years. It's, as I said, educating people as to what they did, what they continue to do, and what we need to do to put a stop to it. And until people are held accountable, until people know that you can lose your job and your freedom, then and only then will there be proper checks and balances. So that's what I've really been up to.
Another question that I do have here, and thank you, Hugh, once again for explaining where we've moved here, is what is actually something that could, so I know we're in the civil phase, but are you working with the Innocence Project or maybe state and local officials or federal officials on any form of criminal justice reform? Right? Because what happened to you could easily happen to many other individuals. Are you working with maybe your congressperson or someone of that nature to really ensure that this doesn't happen again, right? A lot of the forced confession, things of that nature. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I haven't worked with any politicians per se. I have worked with people at the IP, and for me, it's really just trying to educate myself as to what is it that we can do, because a lot of times we say, well, we want to do this or we want to do, and we don't have the means to, we don't know how to really go about doing it. So for me, I'm really trying to educate myself as, well, what is it that we know what we want? How do we go about actually getting it? So that's where I'm at. So I wish I could say that I have a laundry list of things that I've done with politicians. Unfortunately, no, I don't.
And I absolutely understand that it's been a very limited time since you've got to focus on a couple of other things as well. But I do think, just from an external standpoint, that your story is similar to some other stories that we have as well, right? And when we talk about what's happening on a nationwide level in terms of policing and criminal justice reform, with George Floyd, um, and many others, Breonna Taylor, things of that nature. There really has an opportunity here, not just looking at police brutality, that results in the end of a life, but also criminal justice processes um, that were not actually in effect, following your constitutional rights. And I think that's been very much there. But we can talk about that another time. I do have some questions here in the chat box for you here.
Right.
A question from Mika says that, hello, Mr. Burton. I'm sorry that this has happened to you, that you've gone through this tremendous pain and suffering in your life. In those times of darkness, she asks, how did you manage to keep your inner strength intact?
A couple of things. One was my father. I've never seen a human being that strong. You're dealing with providing a defense for your son, making sure that he is as comfortable as can possibly be in an environment that is so opposed to who he is. And at the same time, dealing with the passing of your wife and all of her affairs, and still keeping a balance and still holding on to your sense of sanity. To watch that uh, gave me a strength. I was saying that although I'm going through this and it's very traumatizing, I was always looking at my dad and what he went through, and it's like, wow, imagine doing that balancing act. Um, Being inside, the ability to play music. I'm thankful that one of the things my dad did give to me is the ability to appreciate and play music. So whereas he was a saxophone player, I ended up picking up a piano, and learning to make music while I was there. So being able to make music while I was away was kind of therapeutic for me. Also, I had gotten into running, and gotten into running later on in the years. I want to say I was in my late 20s, approaching early 30s by the time I really started to take running very seriously. And that I think that final piece there, because what running does for you, for your mental state, those things kind of had this balance for me, and that's how I really got through it. And the most important thing, knowing that I wasn't supposed to be there. you know, yeah,
That's great. One of our viewers said music is the best therapy.
it
Thank you
really is.
for the response there, Hugh. Another question comes from Angela, and they say, thank you very much for sharing your story and deeply saddened by what happened to you. Their question is, what can we do in our everyday lives to ensure that this never happens again, prevents this from happening? Like, what action can we take as everyday citizens, right? We talk about this concept of global citizenship. We have a responsibility for social justice and ensuring that everyone has full and equal participation in the everyday, cultural, social, political lives of the country. What can we do?
Right. Great question. One of the things I've often said when I looked at my case, when I looked at everything in which they did, uh, I always looked at the chain of command of things. The paperwork came across someone's desk. Someone said, okay, this is a go. That paperwork went across someone else's desk, and someone else said, this is a go. In New York, the Bronx DA said, this is a go. This is a good case. DAs are elected positions. If you know that the policies and politics of DAs are hell bent on turning a blind eye to what happened to me, then you as the voter should say, look, we don't want you there because you're not in alignment with where we're trying to be and where we're trying to go. So getting involved with politics on that local level, because a lot of the things that happen, especially with regards to prisoners and its policies, always happen at the local level. By the time it gets to the federal level, man, things have been locked and cemented in place for quite some time. So get involved with that, man, and hold them accountable, and let them know that if it is discovered that you've involved in these kind of practices, and we're not going to sit by idly and not say anything about it. They rely on the ignorance of all of us to say, well, there is nothing we can do about it. There really is something we can all do about it, you know?
And you've seen, and so great response there, Hugh. We've seen some individuals, I would say, social media celebrities and activists like Sean King go across the country and try to advocate for reform-minded district attorneys, right? I think, in fact, if I'm not mistaken, here in Texas, in Travis County, which is the city of Austin, has a very much reform-minded, brand new district attorney that's come through. So I think that that's perfect advice, right? Pay attention what happens at a local level, participate in the political process to actually, if you want to make sure that things like this don't happen, where, innocent folks are put into the system and the system doesn't work out, getting involved in there. So I think that's a wonderful answer. From another question we have here from Andrea, says that she admires your strength and thank you once again for sharing your story. And I think this kind of goes on there. What can we do to help? But I think if we were to take a step back and look here at what are some ways, we have a lot of criminal justice majors at our institution. What can they do individually as they plan on going into law enforcement, as they plan on going into the criminal justice field? What can they do, not necessarily specifically, right? Like, I mean, maybe they should follow their own values and morals and things of that nature. But what can they do, right? Like, I think, let's take it back a step. As they're entering into law enforcement, what can they do?
Go inside those, if you can get inside those prisons, if you can go talk, it's important to put a face on people who are sitting inside there. It's very easy to just paint everybody with a broad stroke brush. It's easy to have a degree of cognitive dissonance. It's easy to do those things. Go inside there, go talk to them. I promise you, you will be impacted emotionally where you will feel compelled to want to do something where it won't feel right inside unless you are doing something. There are people there who have very interesting stories. There are people there who may have done things to put themselves there. That is always the case as well. However, they don't want to continue the same pattern of behavior, but if things are not put in, if people are looking at them as the same way, the same behavior is going to continue to perpetuate itself. So go inside those prisons, talk to people. Again, they may change your life. You know what I mean? You may change theirs because they may realize that, wow, somebody really cares. While I was fighting my case, I had a great attorney. I had William Kunstler as my defense attorney. And I'd never felt so safe in that courtroom as the time I had, although we lost. I'd never felt so safe in that courtroom. You know what I mean? And in my case, it didn't matter who was at my defense table, I wasn't going to win. But just that feeling, because he connected himself emotionally to the client. So, treat them more than just clients. They're human beings. And if you can talk to them and connect them, by all means do that.
That's such a great response. I mean, these are all great responses here, Hugh. And I'm thinking of so many just instances within there, right? Understanding folks' lived histories and experiences. I think that's so important. We've seen recently a larger interest nationwide as it relates to the stories of those that are behind bars. If we look at Brian Stevenson and Just Mercy, right? We look at now pop culture is intersecting with these stories, right? We're seeing Netflix really take off in a lot of the either documentaries or stories of for example, the Central Park Five, things of that nature. We're seeing a lot of that. Are we actually, I think maybe this is more of a larger question, are we potentially getting the stories out there that need to be told? And what stories, that, because of your experience, that are out there are not being told?
Mm. The stories, a lot of time, I'll work my way backwards, and if I forgot anything, please stop me and remind me. The stories that are not being told is what happens to the people in which we celebrate, and we see these Netflix things for them. After the cameras go off, what is the quality of life for the person? You've done 10, 15, 20, 25 years. It is almost the same as being in the military. They treat it differently. They say, okay, well, you've been in the service and you've been through combat. Chances are you're suffering from these things. Prisoners are the same way. So, no one is really looking at the quality of life of the person after being exonerated, after the cameras go off and you have to figure out life. Um, so I don't think that that's being told. I think, and if I'm not answering it right, please let me know. You had mentioned something about, celebrities and a lot of things like that, how pop culture intersects with criminal justice reform. I'm glad that there's an awareness happening, but I believe that it's become somewhat of a hashtag now. Um, it's become a hashtag because it's vogue to talk about criminal justice reform. Remember, the same people who were talking about it now 20 years ago, while I was still serving, those were the same people on the other side of the aisle saying, listen, they should never be released. Same people. It's just that the temperament of society is a little bit different. So, we look at it different. So I always tell people, don't allow it to just become a hashtag. People's lives are still hanging in the balance long after the cameras go off. And it's no longer vogue to talk about criminal justice reform. So I hope I answered it. And if I
You absolutely did. And I think that's exactly what I was looking for, right? I think we don't see what happens after the success happens, right? Like, we don't know. I mean, I think that's one of the questions that we had here. How was it returning to society? You went into the criminal justice system as a 16-year-old young person. How do we move so much? How did you navigate learning how to uh, the world, right? Like, how did you learn to navigate the world?
I think one of the saving graces for me from when I left, by the time I came back, it seemed like the world had gone through quantum leaps, technologically speaking. The saving grace for me is that I was like first generation of the kids who had a personal computer in their home in the early part of the 80s. I believe it was a Commodore 64, something to that effect. And being I had a love of that stuff and video games and technology, I always embraced it. So when I got home and I seen all of these things going on, I kind of adapted quickly because it's something that I always did as a kid. So when I had video game consoles, I was the kid that's going to take it apart, see how it works, and then put it back together. So all of the things that was going on was kind of fun for me. Um, the adjustments that I seen in New York, I seen roles reverse. I seen more women doing jobs that men did. I seen more men pushing strollers down the street. That was a bit weird to see the construction worker. She has her wedding band on, but she has the drill, and the guy he has a baby strapped to his stomach pushing the stroller down the street. So that was a bit different. But other than that, everything was smooth.
Great. And so I'm just moving back through some of the questions here. Another person asked, did the real murderer get convicted?
Great question. So when they found him in possession of my mom's car, they locked him up. The prosecutor in the case and the officers in the case decided that, look, we can never let come to light what we did. So they only charged him with grand larceny. Some months after that, he was released on his own recognizance, and he was killed some months after that. So yeah, he never lived long enough to be cross-examined by my attorney. So whatever statements he made are the statements that they allowed to stand during trial.
Wow. And so was he just, I did not know that. And so that to me is just mind blowing. You know, these are things that you would probably see on Law and Order or something of that nature.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So I'm just going back through here. And so I do apologize. We've seen quite a few large scale, nationwide instances of failures in our criminal justice system, right? Whether it was right after your conviction in 1991 was the Rodney King riots, right? All the way up to today with George Floyd and Breonna Taylor. You've been on the other side of the criminal justice system. Has there been any change to the system at all?
Um, yes. You guys have access to much more cameras. Um, we can see things happening in real time now. So whereas in 1992, because like I'll use Rodney King, because that happened to be captured on the news, is how we were able to see it from California. You know, that happening in California over here. Now we are seeing things in the commission as it's happening halfway around the world, and it's being fed through your feed. That's the only thing that has changed. The policies haven't changed. People's views on us has not changed. It's pretty much the same. You know, I had heard you made mention of When They See Us, the Central Park case. I always say this every time that I speak, just to put it into perspective. They arrested me on January 5th, 1989. That case happened a little over 90 days later, 1989. It was the temperament of New York. That's what they did. You know, young black men were the target. Um, and it has not changed. Nothing has changed. It's been 31 years. I've been watching this same show. The thing here is, I think what kind of bothers me, and you know, when people act as if we're not looking at the same program. That's the problem. We all know the program we're looking at. The question begs now, what are we going to do about it? So, not much has changed.
And I would agree, as someone who studies this and helps students understand our system, I don't actually, I haven't seen changes, right? Like we have not seen many changes. That same mentality is there. You look at earlier, you had talked about accountability,
Mhm.
right? What does accountability look like for you?
Accountability. First, for the officers in my case, you know, they're retired and things like that. But they, in my opinion, you know, I always say this, I don't know much about law. I'm only driven off of emotion and what was done to me. I'm like, anything short of them seeing the inside of a prison cell is not justice for me. It's all bittersweet. For the prosecutor in my case, she was the one who had to sew everything together and present a picture. In order for her to be the seamstress of that story, there were a lot of lies that had to be sewn in there, and they had to be sewn in there very delicately in order for this to happen. Um, she should hold a very, very special place. This woman is a judge in Queens, New York, as you and I speak. I don't know how should be in a position to judge about people's lives. When you did this to a 16-year-old child, you knowingly did this. It's not something, oh, there was a mistake made. As more evidence began to come in, you hid more Brady. So you know, there's a real special place for her, very special place for her. So that's what accountability looks like for me with regards to
When we talk about criminal justice reform at a nationwide level, we keep hearing this term qualified immunity, right? for the officers, for the prosecutors, right? When there's malfeasance that happens, things of that nature. Any opinions as it relates to qualified immunity, or we talked about, you had mentioned the thought process that they should maybe be held accountable through the criminal justice system themselves. What are some thoughts about this idea of removing qualified immunity?
Um, hmm, you know, when we give them the power to not be held accountable for the things that they did, that is our government's way. That is our lawmakers' way of saying we accept and encourage what they do. You just happen to find out they slipped up, but we encourage it and we accept it. So, I I don't know. Do they want to change that? I don't know. I don't know, because when you change that, any and everybody can be prosecuted. I mean, so I don't know. But I know that the things that were done to me, the things that were done to the exonerated five, um, is encouraged, and it was green lighted. It was sanctioned. It was okay for them to do that.
Yes, and I would agree. I tend to agree with you. That it's built into the systems, right? Like they are inherently. Um, I would say, I operate from a critical race theory perspective. Critical race theory started in the 1980s and really says that racism is really endemic in pretty much every portion of society that exists there. It was created by Derek Bell, a professor at Harvard University, who later went to be dean of the University of Oregon Law School. And that has really blown up, this thought process of critical race theory. And it's really saturation inside of the criminal justice system is there, right? And we can't separate it from there. There's a lot of conversation on both sides. I'm not going to offer critiques on here, but we see a lot of this understanding, like, yes, racism is endemic in U.S. society. On one side says this, on the other side says something else. And I guess one of our folks here is really looking here. Do you hold any resentment to the system that was supposed to help a 16-year-old and ultimately failed you?
There is resentment. There is anger. Regardless of how much strength I can, show and share, there is anger. But one of the things I always say about anger is that it can be used two ways. It's like fire. It can be used to heat your house or burn it to the ground. You know what I mean? How you apply it. So yeah, there's definitely resentment for what they did. And now that I am a middle-aged man and I see what they're still doing to kids, and they have no knowledge of what's going on, and our schools are not teaching basic civics so they know what their rights are. It's like, yo, wait a minute. No, it is endemic. This is like, you're not even arming us with the information to protect ourselves. No, it is on purpose. It is by design. We have to say what it is.
And I appreciate that. We aren't arming our students, right? I often say to our students here at Texas A&M International University, right? Like, we need to look at these things. We are somewhat in a bubble. We're located directly on the U.S.-Mexico border. Nearest larger city from us is fast, about a 2-hour time zone. So a lot of what we may not see happening in the world is actually happening. So I say we have to examine these things, have these conversations. So I guess my question is, as you were going through the process, how did you get on the radar of the Innocence Project?
Well, after I had exhausted all of my appeals, my attorney at the time, William Kunstler, he had passed. His partner, Ron Kuby, he wrote and said, did he want me to take over? And I was like, well, let's see what we can do. After he examined things, he says, listen, there are no issues that preserved for review on a federal level. So I just started writing to every organization that um, catered towards people saying that they were innocent. There were so many throughout the 90s that were around. I wrote to the Innocence Project even back then. Um, when they finally did write me back, they were telling me that, look, your case doesn't have any issues of DNA. We primarily just deal with cases that have issues of DNA, and I understood that. Someone at intake must have felt or saw something about the letter and said, no, that I feel something about this, and forwarded the letter to Northwestern, Steve Drizzen, who deals with confessions from adolescents. And when they got a hold of it and looked at it, they said, wait a minute, there may be something here. So it was the years of just writing to different innocence organizations that finally, that one that I sent to the Innocence Project that I didn't think I was going to get anything back because I had written to them in the past. That was the one that started the ball rolling.
And what was the next steps, right? So I think like that part of the story you may be missing as well. So you wrote to them, they decided to take your case, and then what happened with that? Right? Like what happened from there?
Well, they didn't decide or like immediately to take the case. I was still inside, and they asked me to go through all of the facts of the case, and then they started to get their own paperwork. I was going to the parole board, so they said, well, look, a lot of people sometimes when they, get home, they decide that, I'm home. I'm okay. I just want to work. I just want to, be left alone. They say, well, if you decide that you're gonna, you still want to fight, we're here. You let us know. And like I said, that was the first phone call that I made because just being paroled, it was bittersweet. It was like parole to what? You took everything from me. So I have nothing left to do but fight and try to restore truth. So I called them and we started trying to unearth evidence and just pulling all these things together. And it was hard. Those first few years, it was hard putting all the facts together because they were so hell bent on making sure that it never came to light. So it was hard. That fact finding phase was very hard. But as we got up to like about 2016, we kind of hit a wall, and we asked the Innocence Project to get back, to get on board again. And they got on board, and when the Innocence Project got on board, I mean, things just really started to pick up, and they were just forming a new conviction integrity unit in the Bronx. They just got elected a new DA in the Bronx, Darcel Clark. So all of these factors were there. And by the time we actually laid out our case and they heard everything and heard from me, they realized that, something is off. We need to do what's right. And thankfully they did the following year.
So if it wasn't for the stars aligning, really, a new DA, you deciding to continue to fight for what you believe was the truth and what is the truth, right? But if you decided, you know what, then Northwestern, continuing, like if it wasn't for all of these things aligning, we may not be sitting here and having a conversation with you today, right?
This is 100% a fact. Let me show you something. I often say this too, that even with Rutgers Law Clinic, every year that we were fighting this case, we would have two law students that my attorney, she would pick to have a fresh pair of eyes on the case. And I still have those relationships with all of those law students. Some of them have gone on into their own practices, but every year one of those students came on board, they found another breadcrumb, and they always hoped that they would be the ones that would be part of the team that would get the case overturned. But it was all of those small breadcrumbs that, gave us all of the evidence that we had when we presented it. So, from those who argued in court, from those who answered the phone, from those who filed something, everybody's part was important in order for me to be here talking to you all today. Everybody's.
And I find that super interesting, right? Because we do all play a part, whether we're in the system ourselves, whether we're in the law field, or whether we're in a nonprofit, right? We all play a part in that if we're in that type of field. Another person wants to know, like, do you want to study law yourself? And then I guess the follow up question of that, what's next for you, right? Like, what's next for you?
Do I want to study law? For all you guys that are into law, my hats is off to you. I salute you. I do not have the faculties to do law. Um, I tried because law library is something that they afford you in prison. I think by the time I got to learning how to shepherdize a case, I said, okay, I've had enough. This is enough for me. I'm not with law. Um, but I appreciate law. I really appreciate it when it's used properly, and when it's used effectively. It's a very great tool. I'm just not a practitioner of it. What's next for me? Getting into school doing engineering for music. So as I said earlier, music has been such a integral part of me and doing time and things like that. I really wanted to just get into the nuts and bolts of what makes it sound good. So, I'm trying to get into doing that. It's the next phase, and it's something that is not. They don't push you out because of age. If you're a good engineer, you're a good engineer. So you can't push me out.
That's great, and I would agree. Sound engineering, no age limit there. I would say that a couple of our folks here are just saying, regardless of whether or not you want to go into the law, and I think I would ditto this as well as some of my students. I do think you should still say, and they believe that you should still consider public advocacy, because I think your story is not, while it's unique to you, is not one that should be just limited to this, right? Like and that's kind of what I was getting towards earlier, is there are folks such as the Innocence Project that work to overturn and exonerate individuals, but much more needs to be done. And your story is very, very, I think, an important one to be told, right? But also the public advocacy component of it, right? Working with, I think over there in the Bronx, if that's where you're located, they got a couple new Congress folk, right? Like that are
Yeah,
absolutely focused on that. So I think it's Jamal Brown is over there. A couple of other folks that could easily work on that advocacy, as we are talking about this as a nationwide, right? Putting in some protection, some additional protections, whether it's in the state of New York or nationwide, to protect, especially you were 16 years old, right? Like
yeah,
protecting those adolescents, things of that nature.
you have
Yeah.
to.
Any last thoughts that you'd like to provide to us? If not, we are closing in on the end of our time together.
Yes. What I always say to the younger people, those who are coming, you guys are going to shape and mold the thinking of everything that's going to happen in this world. Those who are a little bit older than me, the generation before me, because of a lot of different things, it's too much to go into now. They've let a lot of us down, and the weight is on the shoulders of the young. A lot of weight to be put on the shoulders of all of you, but it's something that I know you all are capable of. This is why I enjoy speaking to you all, because if it's something that I can say that you all take, and it's like 20, 25 years, 30 years from now, it's applied. Then for me, it's a job well done. So as you go forth, just be unafraid, stand on truth, man. And when you see wrong, don't turn a blind eye to it. Don't allow it to stand. That makes you worse than those who are actually perpetuating.
Uh, Great words to end us off here, my friend. And so I greatly appreciate it. A couple of our folks here want to know, is there a way we can stay connected with you?
I would hope so. I really, really would hope so because not just for the immediate future, but years down the line, I want to see what people are doing. I'm really invested into people and seeing people grow. So please, I want to stay in contact with everybody. So
Great. So we'll go ahead and reach out to the Innocence Project just to see how that can work there in general. Are you on like social media?
I'm on social media, so you can find me on Facebook. Just Hugh Burton. Social media is still something. It's a weird experience and experiment for me. So it's weird.
I got you, my friend. It is.
Oh my God.
So we can follow you on Twitter, but we can. What we'll do for our viewers is, if they would like to stay in touch and things of that nature, we'll work out with the Innocence Project to work on that. On behalf of our institution, one, just thank you for spending this short hour of your time, with us, sharing your story, and really telling us to get to action. Right? I think that's ultimately what it is. Whatever that action looks like, moving towards action is super important, right? And understanding that we all play a role in ensuring that everyone has an equal opportunity, an equitable opportunity to fully participate in the social, economic, cultural, and political life of the country. And so I greatly appreciate you coming in today and sharing your story. Thank you so very much. Folks, as we move through here, Ms. Nayeli, would you mind putting the link in the chat box? All right, and so just thank you, and everyone's sharing their things. I don't know if you can see the chat box, but everyone's saying thank you. Thank you.
I see it. I see.
Perfect, great. And so, just once again, we greatly appreciate it. I'm going to stop recording now.